Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to go through a Luard deck profile with you. First I'll be going through the grade 0s, moving on to grade 1s, 2s, 3s and then the G zone. After which I'll be answering various questions, then I'll be going on to explain various combos in the deck, and finally I'll be explaining the resource management system. For the grade 0 lineup we have 1V starter because they would be broken if they weren't in every clan. We have 1V critical trigger and 4V heal triggers, because the deck is quite fragile if you have too many G triggers. We have 4 GB critical triggers because it boosts your soul, your Vanguard's power and your hand, so why wouldn't you run it? We have 1 copy of Difarbau for a combo that I'll be explaining to you later. We have 3 copies of Cursed Eye Raven because you want to stand your Dagda during the battle phase, and this is the best way we have of doing it. We have 4 copies of Belial Owl because I still consider the draw of this to be very valuable, and it recycles itself, meaning that the deck can play the long game even more effectively. For the grade 1 lineup we run 2 copies of Dragwizard Knies for the combo I mentioned with Difarbau earlier. We have 2 copies of Black-winged Swordbreaker and 4 copies of Nemain, as Nemain snowballs a lot and Swordbreaker assists with that. We have 4 copies of Dragsaver Esras, as she's an extender, refills the deck and adds a PG to your hand. We have 3 copies of Black Sage Charon and 3 copies of Abyssal Owl, as Abyssal Owl and Charon both serve for countercharging, whereas Charon can do it during the battle phase, but Abyssal Owl helps you filter your Luards out of your deck once you no longer need them. Plus it also helps you search in the early stages if you don't have one. For our grade 2 lineup we have 4 copies of Morion Spear Dragon as our grade 2 ride target, and though I would be careful about going down to 0 soul with him, as just him in the soul on Luard can hurt you a little bit. We have 3 copies of Dragfencer Dagda. Would like to run 4, but it just isn't room for it. And he just for those of you who don't know, he basically calls you a column during battle, which is incredibly effective on the Morfessa turn. We have 3 copies of Dragwizard Naoise, as he's a free extender for hitting Ritual 10, which this set can do fairly consistently on first stride. In terms of good targets for him, there is Black Sage Charon, as if you can spare a soul, she gives you a free counter charge. There is Cursed Eye Raven, as it can turn the single call into potentially 2. And finally there is Belial Owl, as if you sack it with Esras, you can then just draw a card and add a PG to your hand, which is quite good. For our grade 3 lineup I have 3 copies of Dragheart and 1 Dragfall. Dragfall is just there in case I'm against a clan which can wipe my board each turn, as the Dragheart just cannot compete with that. So Dragfall is there just in case. Now for various questions you might have about the deck. First of all, why am I not running Dragwizard Crew? Simple reason, I was running it, but I found I was already getting plenty of counter charge from Charon and Abyssal Owl, and so I cut it. Plus I was rarely able to use its ability, and it was also decreasing the ride consistency, which I didn't particularly like. Next up is why I'm not running Bronach, and simple reason, with only 4 grade 3s in the deck, you have a very low chance of triggering it, and other than that it's just a 13k beta, which this deck doesn't really need, as it's fine with just calling a grade 0 4000 power grade 0 unit to the front row, as Morfessa will give it an extra 15k, meaning that even if your opponent's Vanguard is, say, MLB with its 18k base, it will still be able to hit and have a guard restrict. So I just don't need the 13k body. Next up is why I'm not running Dark Pride Dragon or Blue Espada Dragon, which is just mill 3 and in case of Blue Espada it gets some power, and Dark Pride potentially lets you counterblast 1 and draw. And it's a simple reason. I don't like the random mill aspect, as there's a good chance I could just mill all of my remaining heals or potentially my ravens, and I just don't like doing that. So I decided that I didn't want to run them, and I could already hit Ritual 10 without having to rely on just a random mill aspect. Next up is some of the combos that you can do in this deck. So typically a really good formation looks something like this. Let's just say you have Ritual 10 in your drop zone, and you have Difarbau in front of Knies on this side and Dagda on this side. What you can do is have Knies boost Difarbau, which will be 27,000, or if you use Knies' skill from being placed on deck from the deck while having Ritual 3, it will be 29, which is only really relevant against Force clans. So there's this swing. Then at the end of the battle you can use the skill of Dragwizard Knies and counterblast one card, and that will kill Difarbau. Then you get to draw a card. Next you can use the skill of Difarbau, where since it's retired from rearguard by Knies, who has a ritual ability, you can then send Difarbau to the soul and look at what the top card of your deck is. And then you can either send it straight into your drop or superior call it to rearguard. Let's say you get very unlucky and get the worst call possible, which is Abyss Healer. Pretty much regardless of what you get, you will be calling it to rearguard. You can then attack with Abyss Healer, who thanks to Morfessa is a 20k beta. So unless your opponent got a defensive, this will be hitting. Next, you can attack with Dagda, and use Dagda's Counterblast, sack Abyss Healer, who you just called, or if you called a grade 2 or grade 3, then you can just sack the Knies, as you have to sack a grade 1 or lower in order to use Dagda's ability. Then you can call out Black Sage Charon, and let's just say you don't have too much left in the way of grade 1s, and you call out a Dragsaver Esras that you returned earlier that turn. Knies would die, and then you can use Charon's Soul Blast to refund Dagda's cost, and you have Difarbau back in the drop along with Knies. So if you're able to use Luard's ability, so then next turn you can use Luard's ability to send them back into the deck, and then counterblast one, sack something, and call this column back out to the field with Stride skill, meaning you can use this attack twice with this column pretty much every single turn. Anyway, once you've done that, you can attack with Morfessa and do your twin drive. And then do your triple drive, and if you get a stand trigger, you can stand your Dagda and then attack with this column, attack with Dagda, once again counterblast one, sack it, and call a fresh column. So without a stand trigger, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 attacks, and with a stand trigger, you'll be getting you'll take that 5 attack turn up to 7 attacks. Or if you manage to stack your deck well enough, and it's very thin with a large quantity of stand triggers, then what you can do is attack with this. Then if you get the predicted double stand, you can stand your Dagda, then stand this column, then attack with this column, then attack with Dagda, and potentially superior call a new column here, though if you're able to predict getting double stand triggers, then then you may not have enough grade 1s in deck to be able to do that. Okay, and now for the resource management. First of all, in terms of cards which give you Counterblast, you have Black Sage Charon and Abyssal Owl. You want to be using these abilities as much as you possibly can. Charon a little more sparingly than Abyssal Owl, as she requires Soul. In terms of the cards that will be using the Counterblast that you generate and acquire over the course of the game, you have Dragfall, who, as I said, you won't be going into too much. You have Dagda, who you'll only use once or twice per game as you empty your deck of grade 1s very quickly, at which point the Knies combo becomes quite a bit better because it doesn't require you to have grade 1s in your deck. Then there is Swordbreaker, who you'll want to use early game, though you'll only really want to use her once or twice, and after that you can't really afford to pay it unless you've been countercharging a lot. Then there is Dragwizard Knies, whose counterblast is essential, and you want to be saving your counterblast for him in most cases. There is Phantom Blaster Diablo, who you only really go into in the Knies matchup. There is Morfessa, who just pluses you quite a bit, though she is one of the ways in which you can sack Abyssal Owl. So if you want to, you can have 2 Abyssal Owls on the field, use Morfessa's skill, and have a net cost for her of countercharge 1. And then finally there's Dragheart with his stride cost. And now the cards which will give you soul. There is Difarbau, who will be giving you the majority of your soul in most cases, and also in most cases you want to get him back out of your soul as quick as you possibly can. And then the other card is Dagger Piece of Passing Pryderi, and if you just use him once or twice, then typically you'll have enough soul for the entire game. In terms of the cards which will be using the soul, there is Dark Dragon, Darkveil Dragon, who you pretty much just go into if Difarbau is left in your soul at the end of your turn, even if you don't really need to, assuming you want to go for an aggressive play next turn. There is Morion Spear, who once you go up to grade 3, he's pretty much just discard fodder. You don't mind seeing him go to damage, and you only really use him to try and grade 2 game your opponent. There is Black Sage Charon, who requires soul, and she is probably going to be the main source of your soul blasting. And finally there is Dragabyss, who you only really use the soul blast ability of if you are being damage denied. And finally, in terms of cards that can refill your deck, there is Dragheart Luard, who you don't use too much. There is Dragheart Luard, which is the best way for you to get cards back into a deck. Belial Owl and Cursed Raven both send themselves back into the deck. And then for the cards which take cards out of your deck, there is Difarbau, as he can superior call a card from the top of your deck. There is Dragfall with his stride skill. There is Dragwiser Bronach, as she calls anywhere between 0 and 5 cards from the top of your deck. There is Jellydew, as if you move 2 cards to the Guardian Circle, she draws you a card. There is Dragabyss, as he just calls grade 1 straight out of your deck. Morfessa, because she lets you draw 2. Dragheart with his stride skill. Morion Spear Dragon, with his ability to cycle you a card. Naoise superior calls a card from the top 5. Dagda calls you a column. Pryderi draws you a card when he uses ability. Cursed Eye shuffles himself into the deck and then calls 1 to 2, not 1, 2 cards. Well, and so he can be a strain on your deck, or you can just call him from hand and then just shuffle him back into the deck. There is the V-Starter, who of course draws you a card at the start of the game, and then there's also Belial Owl, who you'll be using quite a bit. And that concludes my Luard deck profile. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. This deck is pre-VBT10, and I do have some ideas for what to do for post-VBT10 that I haven't had a chance to test them out yet. Once I've got the deck list, then I will be uploading it, but for now this is all I have. I do have, and I will say that at the moment I am working on 2 decks. There is a Zazan build for Luard, since Morfessa can call Zazan out of the drop zone, and then Zazan can give you 2 more attacks. And the other one is basically just a modification of this deck, but add in the new Morfessa. Not sure what I'm going to cut though. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.